Welcome to Thriving in the Workforce, Disruptive Dialogues with Leaders Who Care. This is a new series brought to you by Your Coach Health, where we'll be discussing top issues that are on top of mind for HR and benefit leaders everywhere. And in every episode, we'll be asking the same question: how do we move the needle? Each guest will be given an opportunity to answer. If you had a magic wand, what is something that could be done to move the needle today? My name is Marina Borohovich, and I'm the CEO and founder of Your Coach Health, where we provide mental health support in the form of life health coaching, either directly to employers or through our white label solution, powering up other brands, including digital health solutions, health plans, and EAPs.
And I'm Eugene Borohovich, co-founder and CEO of Your Coach, and welcome, Celeste. And we would love for you to introduce yourself. And you've been in well-being space for a number of years, so we'd love to hear a little bit of your history and background and how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for having me. I appreciate this conversation. I know it's going to be a great one. I'm Celeste Harrington. I have been in the well-being space for, I guess, like 16 years, if you count like even coaching and training as a health coach and fitness coach in my grad school undergrad years. But I entered the corporate wellness space via an internship through Apple on their wellness team, and it progressively increased my breadth of knowledge, everything from fitness to benefit communications and health plans to outreach and health education and challenges and mental health and EAPs and all of those amazing things that kind of sit under the umbrella of global well-being at a large tech company.
That's amazing. Gives us a lot to talk about today. Lots of different
Yes.
So I was going to say you've been in this industry for over a decade in the mental and well-being mental health space, but it's almost 2 decades, as we just found out.
Mm-hmm.
Are you averaging up? Never average up, average down.
Yeah, but for something like this, it's such an impressive number, so for something like this, it's, we're going up, right? Like 2 decades. So
I'll take it.
Love it. It's the age. So you're confusing it. When we talk about my age, we always go down, but when we talk about experience, we go up. So.
I'll take it.
So just what have you seen? What trends? I mean, there's always trends, right? What have you seen come and go, and what has been proving successful and stayed or evolved?
I mean, this is such a big question because so much has changed, and I don't know if we can say we can thank 2020 for that, but it is something that has evolved through the COVID and the pandemic. Before pre-pandemic times, I noticed that physical well-being was kind of the priority when you thought about well-being, right? We had on-site fitness centers, and it was all about fitness. And I can think about like gym pass, like getting employees to exercise, and maybe biometric screenings and flu shot kind of campaigns were kind of it, really. And then there was the health plan. And then of course, traditional EAP, but we weren't really talking about mental health like we are today. And then of course, the pandemic hit and COVID hit, and then people weren't in the office. And so who's going to your on-site fitness centers? It's crickets, right? Like no one is there. No one's on campus. Some people don't even want to be on campus now that we've had this ability to transition to remote work. And then mental health kind of became a household vocabulary, right? Like we're talking about mental health more and more as generations are getting younger and younger. Or the workforce is getting younger and younger, they're valuing mental health and balance, and burnout is raging like crazy because there's less boundaries with this remote work, even though people are desiring it. So there's this big transition that I've witnessed away from the physical well-being and more into the mental and emotional well-being. Talking about mental health, making sure that employers have mental health benefits, whether it's an EAP or through the health plan or mix of both, or a coaching platform, right, of some sort. But that is where we're seeing a huge uptick in not only the way we're talking about well-being, but where we're seeing utilization kind of shift and change too.
Yeah, we always, when we're asked us the question, right? Like we started like a little before we started this platform, a little before COVID hit, and everybody's always asking, how did it affect you? And we almost feel guilty saying that for our business, it brought more light into what we do. It brought more light into this mental well-being space, where before, like you said, it was more about physical, and that's still important, like absolutely
For
important.
sure. Mm-hmm.
Huge part of what makes a person, right? But yeah, and I love what you mentioned, the younger generation, they value a whole different set of benefits than what we were going into the workforce valuing. And I love that companies are evolving with that and focusing on that more.
Well, they have to retain talent or attract talent, right? Like I've seen studies, and I haven't looked in it too much lately, where what new employees are valuing, right? And not all of it is the salary. Like some people will take a lower salary for the ability to work remote, or a lower salary for a different benefit that they would get. I just talked to a friend who had her executive coaching covered in her previous employer and not with her new employer. And she was like distraught about it. I was like, oh, but you're making more money now. She's like, I know, but now I have to pay for this thing out of pocket. So it's really interesting to see what people are valuing.
But it's interesting also, you mentioned on the boundaries earlier, right? Because the boundaries start blending. I do feel, and we obviously interact with many individuals. We do feel that people are actually taking their holidays more seriously, because of the burnout challenges. I think good leaders are also trying to make that line pretty clear. I know we tell our team that unless it's a fire, you need to really relax and you can kind of take in your own space and headspace, right? So I think the boundaries, while I think they sort of blended for a bit, I think, and again, to your point, I don't have the stats in front of me for our viewers and listeners, but we'll come back with some.
Yeah, I would hope, like I always want to say that people are getting better at boundaries, but I just see examples time and time again where it's not the case. I see it, of course, it's industry specific too. And as manager and leader specific, right? Like there's this top down approach for, from the organization's culture and how they manage balance and boundaries. And I think there's also this illusion that balance is 50-50. And it really isn't. Like life is so seasonal. I think we can all relate to that, sometimes you're going to be busier than others. And a word that we've been trying to play out, we haven't really put a lot of effort into it, but is harmony. Like, is there harmony between your work life and your personal life? And who is it balanced? I don't know, but is it harmonious? I think that's kind of a different way to think about it. And some people like to work a lot, and that might be great harmony for them, right? And it's not 50-50, and others might think otherwise. So I think there's a lot that we can kind of change the narrative around of what boundaries and balance looks like.
And it's ever changing, right? Let's not forget that it's ever changing. And what works today may not work tomorrow and may work again the day after. So
exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's never going to be 50-50. Life is not 50-50. Like
no, never is.
Right.
You kind of took us through a little bit of the waves, right? Kind of physical health, much more importance on the mental health. There's obviously, across the board, there's many solutions out there. I know I've spent time at a big corporate and more in an innovation role. And actually there was a study that came out that people that are sitting in kind of central roles that are pushing kind of new things, doing analysis on new things, implementing new things, are actually more burnt out than not centralized units, right? And sort of bringing it back, it was always a challenge to deploy something new, right? So I'm curious, kind of your experience through the tech world. How has it been? Because there are solutions that are popping onto the field. There's ebbs and flows in these solutions constantly, and making these choices and incorporating, especially in large organization, it's always a challenge. So curious to hear your journey through that.
Yeah, I think the challenge with larger organizations is you have a corporate culture, but that culture is going to shift region to region, country to country, org to org, business unit to business unit. And so while a company might roll out a new solution, like how is that going to be received by each of these different populations? So I think that's something that we're always struggling with, or that industry, like tech in general, or even a large organization in general, manufacturing. I see this a lot, where you have these different populations, and you have to have a unique solution, not a different solution, but a unique approach to each solution to roll that out. But burnout, it's interesting because people are fried. I thought we kind of maybe evolved a little bit out of the burnout space, but I gave a burnout talk recently and the statistics were just so alarming. And every time I see a new burnout statistic, it seems to be higher and higher. Like, okay, there's a serious problem here. And it's systemic, right? It's not just work, it's also life and the demands we place on each other and ourselves. And so I think that's an issue that has to be solved at some point whenever we roll out a solution, because what I always hate to hear is like, it's another thing, right? Like, this is another thing someone has to do to get better or heal or be more productive. And people don't want one more thing to do. So how can we like communicate it or embed it or let people make time for these things? Like, I was actually just thinking, these are problems I think about. Like, I think about like a manufacturing solution or a retail environment where people don't have time off the floor, off the line to go do the thing, right? Go do the coaching call, even schedule one. They don't have a personal computer. Generally, there's like a back of house or a break room, and maybe it's shared, it's not private. And so these are things that people have to think about, like decision makers have to think about when they're rolling out a solution. They're like, oh, this is a great new thing. And how are people going to use it? Right? Because it's different. Someone who's sitting at home who can do these things, or in a private office, which even those are going away, right? The private office situations, most people or big companies are moving towards like community workspaces, which don't offer any privacy. So go ahead.
Sorry, I'm smiling because as you're talking about this, this was probably a little less than 6 months ago. We actually implemented still a live session, but a chat only, right? Thinking there was a few people that asked, we thought it was kind of interesting. It's almost 30% of across our book of business now, because exactly a lot of the production folks, to your point, there's no offices anymore, but I can put my headphones on and just chat live, right? Just texting. So behaviors change, right? Patterns change. The whole office production worker, I could be parked, I could be a driver for someone, parked to the side and take my session. So
Totally.
it's fascinating to hear you speak about this as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's all these different use cases, right? For any benefit, like this is more of like mental health specifically. I mean, I guess you could stop on the side of the road and like do some exercises if you wanted to meet with your personal trainer or something. But, as this well-being space evolves, the tech solution, I think, is so interesting too, because of that younger workforce space who is used to a more texting environment. They grew up texting and things. So that is something that I'm hearing more and more of a desire for. And as policies and regulations around that evolve and change too, to adapt, right? That's something else that we have to think about, is like, there's solutions for this, but there's also regulations around like therapy and mental health and coaching, and maybe less on the coaching space, but for sure in the therapy space. And so having those like cross state line, cross country line regulations and borders, like how does that change and evolve in a tech solution? Like, so many different things and aspects to think about.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned measuring productivity, and everybody talks about having a more productive workforce, which we find a little bit, how do you measure that, right? So we've had a lot of conversations and discussions around ROI, and there doesn't seem to be a consensus. How do you measure the success of a mental health solution? And how long does it take to see if a solution you implemented is successful or not? I know it's a loaded question.
It totally is. Of course, utilization is always a great measure of success. And I'll put an asterisk around that too, because anytime someone asks me for like EAP data, I always have another follow-up question. It's like, how are you planning on using this? Because you can interpret just like any other data, you can interpret it in so many different ways. So if, say, you have high utilization in one area, like countries, for example, what does that mean? Does that mean that there's like major mental health concerns that we need to be worried about, or are they just interested and excited about the benefit? Or like there's so many different ways to interpret that.
Context.
Yeah, context really does
Yep.
matter. Productivity is interesting, and we're seeing this measured in so many different ways with a lot of different organizations, right? Like all sorts of like Gallups and all those industries that are surveying different populations. It is interesting because I find that organizations are wanting more and more of that data from the supplier. Is like, how can you measure success? We want to see productivity, we want to see ROI, we want to see utilization super high. But the thing about these benefits and benefits in general, like health plan or not, people only access the benefit when they need it. Like I think about new parent leave. Like, are we going to measure new parent benefits as successful based on our entire population? Probably not, because I'm only going to go look for those benefits or utilize them if I'm a new parent, right? Same thing with mental health. Like, am I going to go seek that out immediately when I'm feeling really healthy and productive? Probably not. So there's all these different ways to look at these different success measures. I know that there are some survey questions that I think are really impactful. Obviously, clinical outcomes for anxiety and depression are really helpful. Absenteeism, how are we looking at a leave of absence, like healthcare claims and things. I think we're going to make some positive correlations between utilization and the reduction in those clinical outcomes, and then also a reduction in LOA. Like those are, I think, correlations that we can always look at. There are some ROI analysis that are coming too that take a look at the healthcare claims and then like EAP or coaching utilization and make correlations there as well. But those are all kind of dollar signs. But it comes to the productivity is hard because what do you look at? Like the outcome of the company, the fiscal year, like statements and announcements, like how much the company is making or producing. I think where I mentioned too, like those intake surveys or end of program surveys, or people are like showing up at work, or they're spending more time at work. That could be one way to measure it. So it's all kind of this quantitative or even qualitative data from the user of how they're spending their time at work and if they are feeling focused and productive, right? I don't know if there's any way to measure it, because the last thing we want is some manager sitting there like calculating hours, butts, and seats, like saying that their employee is productive, right? Because it's all really results driven.
And again, back to the example. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, and it's self-reported, results driven.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it depends on the industry, and even within the industry, the type of the employee, right? And what work that individual is actually performing and doing. And again, back to the contextual aspects of all of that, right?
Absolutely. And like, think about like a creative person, right? And their sole job is to spend time and have white space and time to just think. Like, how do you measure that versus someone who's like in a manufacturing environment who might have like units to punch out, right? So it's very role specific, and like industry specific, to be honest.
I do believe that just watching the space, before joining Marine and building the company here, just watching the space, I do think that I put it in quotes, like well-being programs have evolved significantly. I think even from a metrics and success factors perspective, I think they are much more ROI and now, VOI driven, in addition to. I think it was, I think that it contracts and goes with cycles, right? Because I think when companies are, there's not enough workforce out there, you cannot bring people on, there's not enough talent, you tend to invest and sort of don't look at the ROI as much just because you want to attract the people. In the contraction economy cycles, we do see that kind of progressive leaders are not letting go of those budgets because that tide will turn again, right? But I think it did evolve. I mean, some of these metrics that more clinical outcomes, some of the savings, hard absenteeism, and so I do think it evolved over a decade plus in metrics.
Yeah, it's really, I think it is hard for a leader to see like, this is going to cost me how much? And to not have like those hard savings to back it up, but it's coming. Like, I do know that data is coming and it's really impactful, but there is it is an expense, right? It is a benefit that an organization has to be okay with spending money on.
Let's peel the onion just one layer, right? Because again, sort of on the same track of the well-being programs have evolved, and even potentially the definition of it has evolved as the time. So, curious on your thoughts, what you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke about this recently at a conference, not as a talk, but as a side conversation of how it has evolved. I feel like what I have seen, this is again, like larger organizations, I do just have that one lens. I do not have the experience in the startup space or smaller orgs. So I feel like it's a little different how it's managed. Yeah. But what I've seen initially is it's kind of like, hey, we're going to stand up this wellness program. We're going to have these outreach and these challenges and education. And it's kind of like, that's the team and that's their role. And I find that what I'm seeing now is it's always been kind of part of HR. But I find that the roles are becoming more blended. Like even my current role is very much more involved in HR than I ever have been in the past. And so that's an evolution that I'm seeing, is it's kind of becoming more part of the HR organization versus a standalone benefit or product or team. And I think there's pros and cons to that. And I'd actually be curious to see what you guys are seeing. And I think there's still those standalone well-being teams, but I think the integration into the health plans and the HR and people teams is really important to know that it's kind of standard operating procedure, right? Of like, this is part of what we do for our like total rewards packages or our benefits planning, because it's not just by itself. It's not just the gym. It's not just a fitness reimbursement program. It's part of the health plan, because as we're seeing, there's so many impacts to the health spending with employees using these benefits in a positive way. So that's what I'm seeing. I think the way we're talking about it too, like, physical versus mental, kind of it becoming all up, is changing. Those are kind of like my main trends, I would say, that I'm seeing. I may be missing one off the top of my head, but yeah, I'd be curious too if you would agree with that or if you're seeing something different.
I think the short answer is yes, yes, and yes. I think it, you alluded to the larger organizations versus, let's call it mid-market, right? And I think even they're very industry specific. I mean, obviously as organizations get smaller, the same, HR leader broadly is wearing, lots of different hats, and in many cases relying on consultants and brokers, right?
Yes.
But I do think that, it doesn't matter what size of the company. At the end of the day, we always say this: people work with people, not logos, right? And I think that's where, do I want to make an impact to the talent, to the employees that are ultimately making this company better, whatever the company is. So I think we're seeing all kinds, and exactly.
Yeah, value prop for sure.
Am I checking boxes or am I making a difference? Like it's because everybody's offering something, right? But it's the quality of what you're offering. Speaking of blended roles, part of why I love having this conversation with you is because you are a health coach.
Mm-hmm.
So coming from that space, from that position, how do you feel about health coaching now being embedded into every offering from EAP to health plans? And do you feel that it differs from what we've come to understand as health coaching, and I'll dare say real health coaching?
Yeah, I hear you. That industry has evolved so much, and I have so many thoughts. We could have a whole discussion around that industry alone.
That's part two, Celeste. Part two.
Yeah, you'll have me back. It's interesting because I'm seeing solutions. Part of my role in my corporate hat versus my entrepreneur hat is vendor management and selection. And I'm seeing so many solutions become one size fits all solutions, where they're kind of bolting on the coaching, they're bolting on maybe menopause support or new parent support or all these different solutions. And so I get that. And I think being experts in the industry, a SME, a subject matter expert is like really important. I think we talk about the quality over quantity. And I wouldn't expect a supplier to be a one size fits all. So with that said, I don't know that it's that valuable to have coaching everywhere across the board, because in the situation that I'm in my corporate life, is it makes it really hard because we have all these redundancies. And part of benefits communication.
Or even perceived redundancies, right? Perceived redundancies, because the word coaching, to your point, could be.
It could be.
Embedded.
There's different coaching types, right? Everywhere. And I think I could go in so many different angles in this, and so I'm trying to be really clear. I think that without confusing myself and others, what I'm going to talk about is the confusion is with benefits communication. They are confusing. Employees don't know where to go or how to access something. And so when you see coaching at all of their corners of the health plan or another benefit, you're like, well, what am I doing? Like, what do I need these coaches for? And coaching is relatively new. It's not new as an industry, but it's new as part of like a benefit for an employer to offer, right? Unless you're like an executive and you had an executive coaching. Coaching for mental health and physical health and financial well-being is like relatively newer. And of course, I love it. I'm one being a coach myself, but it's an interesting space because people still don't know what it is, especially when it's coming from their employer versus seeking it outside of their workspace. So I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm still kind of marinating on a lot of them, obviously. But I don't think every solution needs to have coaching.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you said that a lot of employees are confused because coaching is thrown to them from every direction. But we find that a lot of benefit leaders are also somewhat confused because when we talk to them, they say it is offered, we have it through a health plan and it's offered through EAP, when essentially we're talking about completely different things, because what somebody's calling coaching is not in fact coaching. So
yeah, it is. And I love coaching, and I want everyone to have a coach. A health coach, whether using it for mindset or physical health or even the financial component, a lot of the things that you talk about across all aspects are like fairly similar, just the context sort of changes, right? And so, and usually when you help someone in one area of their life, it impacts other areas of their life, which is amazing. And it's just reaching this population of people who don't want therapy or aren't ready for therapy or don't ever need therapy, right? And that's the majority of people. And so I love the solution, and I'd love to see everyone using a solution for coaching, most certainly. But I think having a coaching solution, specifically coaching, would be really helpful for like a communication perspective.
And again, tied to those outcomes that we've talked about earlier, right? Because ultimately it's not a perceived, there are measures, right? How are you feeling? Are you feeling better mentally? Are you feeling better physically? There are measures around. This is not new, right? So.
Right, it isn't new. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of measuring, this is something also we come across constantly because, a lot of the leaders that we speak to, there's obviously budget constraints everywhere, right? Especially in this market. And we keep hearing the whole, PEPM, right? So per employee per month. We hear dead, right? Dead, no longer. And then we kind of on the other side of it, managing that budget. Well, if I have X number of employees and I'm paying X cents dollars per employee, it's manageable. It's a good checkbox that I cover everyone. Now, we all know utilizations are typically very low in that. On the other side, per engaged, and we can go for probably an hour, what does engaged really mean? We have our own strong opinions on it, but that's a whole per engaged user. If you're pushing it too hard, that can blow your budget. So I'm curious how, in this world, how do you offer things to everyone and yet, drive that utilization and all of that?
That is such a hard balance as a budget owner. I feel so much pain.
That's why we're asking the tough questions here, right?
It's so hard because I love the predictability of a PEPM. Like, it's great, right? I don't have to go in for extensions or approvals to any leadership because we know what we're getting, or what to expect month to month in invoicing, or even annually for invoicing. It's great for budget and forecasting. However, you're right, like utilization is hard because we're paying a flat rate for the most part for a particular solution, and you want as many users as possible. I think that's exciting because then you get to focus on engagement campaigns. That's kind of neat, and watch spikes kind of happen and get as many people enrolled as possible. And then of course there's the perks of the opposite model, which is the engagement model, right? Whether it's registered or actually actively engaged. I guess it depends on how the solution wants to define that. I know you all define that very specifically of like actively in a coaching program.
Yep.
And I've seen it across the board of all these different models. The utilization model by engagement is really tricky to track. I think it's really valuable because you're only paying for what you're using, but it is a nightmare to trace. I think there's value in it because it's great. You're like, okay, I know we're using it. This is awesome. But when you have a solution that has incredible utilization, like higher than you would have ever predicted or expected, that's where it gets really tricky. And I've seen that happen this last calendar year, like it was out of control, which is not a bad problem to have, just one that costs a lot of money that you didn't expect to spend. And so I think there's value in it. And I think it's also like an opportunity for suppliers to have, performance guarantees or PGs around some of their work, a really strong engagement campaign or communication campaign to help increase utilization, or to really a lot of transparency and here's how we're trending, a lot of book of business comps that you could just say, hey, here's how someone in your industry has done. But also I think from a culture perspective, there's things that you kind of can't predict for a utilization perspective. I think different regions, you would think around stigma around mental health and they wouldn't have a lot of utilization, are some of our highest engaged areas. And so there's just tricky things to navigate around the engagement model. That just, I think, has to be a really transparent relationship between the supplier and the org.
But still keeping obviously the privacy of that employee, right?
100%. Yeah.
That's the key component of all of this. So.
Absolutely. Transparency around hey, this is where we're trending cost-wise.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We truly believe in that's the only way that this can work if there is transparency. There's transparency on both sides.
Yeah.
The only way they can.
No one wants a surprise bill in their email.
No. Nobody wants to argue a surprise bill,
Utilization is great, and you owe us $1 million.
Yeah. Great.
Well, listen,
everybody's healed. We can stop this now.
Yeah, but it's a good problem to have, right? Whenever you roll out a solution and you're 30% will use it, and you're we're at 46. You're okay, wow, did not expect that. This is amazing. And can we renegotiate? Right? That's what happens.
Yeah. No, that's super helpful. Looking forward, what do you see the future of mental health benefits?
Oh gosh. Tech.
We're not going to hold you to it, by the way.
Please don't. I'm not.
Depends on what Celeste says next. Depends on what.
I am not solely responsible. So tech obviously is just embedding itself in healthcare, period, right? Which is about damn time, right? Let's catch up to the times. Why is healthcare always behind our technological advances and solutions? Online scheduling should not be should be a no-brainer, right? Should be included. And that still doesn't exist in some spaces, right? And so I think just tech being involved sounds so simple and a no-brainer, and something that I think we're going to continue to see, especially I'm not going to speak too much on AI, but we know that's going to come into play, especially in mental health. how are we leveraging those tools to bring mental health care to more people who don't have access? I think that's something that we'll see as well, as just expanded access to care, thinking about like those legislation around licensing and certifications and who can counsel and coach where. I think that will probably evolve and change because technology is getting involved. Like, why can't a therapist from California counsel someone in New York? I do not know. Right. I mean, I do know why, but like, why are we not allowing that to happen? So
why the the restrictions, right?
Exactly. And so I think just like expanding access is only we're just opening the floodgates, I think, to care, which I think is amazing. I think with technology, it's interesting because I would say, okay, well, maybe that will lower cost to care, but I also think with tech being involved increases costs for these solutions and platforms. So it'll be interesting to see, because as we've seen with the pandemic and COVID, just people getting into care, wait times and all of that has just been kind of astronomical. And so how can we see tech kind of make a change? I think this is all kind of like immediate change in the next 5 years, to be honest. I don't know where we'll be beyond that. Will I have a robot counseling me? I don't know. Or coaching me? I don't know. But I think there's a lot to be said around access via the text that we were talking about, the chat functionality from coaching to therapy. I think that'll be amazing. Even the physical health component, like if we bring that in, like that is remaining in a really great space virtually. We haven't seen too much change in that space, right? People are going back to the gym, but they're using digital solutions to work out when they're in the gym. So that'll be really interesting to see where that evolves too. But yeah, I think access to care, I would imagine, is going to be a game changer.
5 years. So I don't think we're gonna have bots coaching us in 5 years. But let's see what 15 or 20 will bring.
I hope it's not that slow, but yeah.
We do have these discussions.
I think
I think we think it's more of a generational, like we still have people kind of hopping on and like, wow, you're not a bot, you're a real human that I can talk to. Right. So I think, we sort of over indexing on technology. Now, again, I keep using this example, somebody who was born today and downloads character.ai and that's his or her buddy from the early ages, just like the iPad generation. I think they're going to be used to it. Right. So I think it'll take time, but it is moving quick. So
it is. And something that what you mentioned that made me just think is like connection is so important to mental health. The employee resource groups and the other community factors that are either in an organization or in your own personal life really impacts mental health. Like we all know that. And so I think having the human component is so important still. Whether that'll change or not with technology, I don't know. But I think what you said and alluded to around people knowing like, oh, you are human. Like, I think we get that whenever we call like those service numbers and we get talked through the phone tree and it's not a human. Like, I just want to talk to a human. I think that still exists with coaching and therapy, right? Like, you're like, just give me the human. It's going to get the job done faster and I'm going to get what I need. Because at the end of the day of a coaching or therapy relationship, yes, it's like a relationship and we're relying on that for connection, but you still want results, right? You still want better health. You still want a better mindset. You still want more money. You still want a better job, right? Like you want the result. And right now humans are helping you get that result through their experience. So
we always talk about in the near future, at least, technology augmenting the human, but not replacing it, and maybe for somebody born today, but not yet, not our generation.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about, AI taking notes for you or charting for you or scheduling for you. That frees up you as an expert to do the best part of your job, which you love. We all love the coaching part, Do we love the like website development and emailing and note taking? No. But can I do that? Robot do it? Great. Do it, please.
Yeah. Everybody should be doing what they do best, what they thrive at. Yeah. So we talked about 5, 10, 15 years. Our favorite question to ask, you have a magic wand. What can we do today to move the needle?
Oh gosh, these magic wand questions kill me. But in the best way, because it makes us think critically about and strategically about where we want to see the space going. I think I always go back to just kind of communication and knowledge. You know, if everyone knew how they could benefit from a resource or a benefit from a benefit,
Yep.
that would change the world, right? Like change the way you work, change the way you work, not only at work, but also with your family dynamics and parenting and all the things that you want to evolve in your life. Like there's a resource and a benefit there. And I just think that the barrier to entry on like the finding the resource and communicating the resource, like that is my magic wand solution. If there's like the best way to communicate not just the value and the benefits of coaching or therapy or whatever the benefit is, just that they know about it, right? How many emails can you send that don't get opened or even opened but not read or clicked, right? Like how can we just like magic wand infiltrate someone's brain and say, hey, do you know this exists and how it can help you? That would be amazing. And that I think is a really hard problem to solve.
That's a great solution for us to work on next. I like that.
Yeah.
We actually get into their heads.
Yeah. I don't know how we're going to do it, but some sort of magic marketing.
Magic wand. This is how it's done. Celeste, thank you for joining us live. If you're listening to us on YouTube or on our podcast, please do like and subscribe as we have many more disruptive dialogues coming your way. If you have any questions for Celeste, our team at Your Coach, or future guests, please do reach out to team@yourcoach.health. Let's move the needle together. Celeste, thank you again.